what like dark psychology tactic do you see kind of in real life most often? Like what comes to mind?
I think dark psychology is kind of based on psychological theories that we then interpret it to be kind of the evil use or the manipulative use. But there are a lot of effects. For example, there's like the pratfall effect that we use sometimes, which is the idea that competent people become more likable when they show small, relatable flaws. And I think on social media, that's also very relevant. So you have all the influencers who show the raw parts of them, and then suddenly they have this cult massive following because people relate to them, for example.
And why is that? Why do we find it interesting when competent people get vulnerable with us, do you think?
I think as humans, we're social animals who feel the innate need to belong. So when we see flaws, we kind of relate better. And so we feel like the connection is stronger because we see parts of ourselves in that person with flaws and imperfections as well.
Yeah, I
Mm,
think it's like an authenticity thing. It's like you kind of for a moment you come off that pedestal that that person put you on, and you're again on the same human level with them, and then so it's easier for you to devote your time and attention to their thing, or you feel more, I don't know, you feel more accepting of buying their product or whatever because you're like, oh, they're just like me, they're not. It's no longer maybe a customer to like a customer and company relationship. It's like two humans, and that's where I think it's weird in this world today. We kind of blur those lines with all the like social media marketing and things like that. Um,
Definitely. I think people ultimately just want to feel good about ourselves. We're so stressed and there's so much pressure that exists in the world, especially with the idealized picture that influencers or social media, for example, portray, that whenever we see the flaw in them, we kind of really tend to grab onto that because that's proof for us that we ourselves don't have to be perfect. And I think that really gives us clarity, calm, and also kind of self confidence that we all desperately need and look for in the world right now.
and do you think that like dark psychology, this term, it has to be, it is always manipulative and always like the person that's doing it is doing it intentionally and consciously to get what they want. And like, I guess what I'm also asking is when does it become dark? Is it that sort of bad intention behind it, or can we? Because I've got a bit of a theory that I'll go into in a second, but can we also do it unintentionally, just naturally, or is it there's something in that sort of intentionality of it that makes it manipulative?
I think most of the psychological tricks per se we do without thinking, so unconsciously. And then when psychologists came about and started studying it, they figured out, this is what we do, and this is what produced a certain effect. So then the laws were formed based on this. I think dark psychology or a field of psychology, aka research effects or theories that are proposed as dark psychology, is just psychological research and information that ultimately is awareness and knowledge. I don't think it is bad per se or manipulative. If the intention is good and if it's used ethically, I think it all boils down to what's the purpose of the person who's using it and are they aware of it at the moment where they're trying to achieve a certain result or not.
I think it's the intention because I think a term like manipulation, I think it can actually be good in certain situations. It's the motivation behind that. Like, I'd be interested in what you see, Joel, most in dark psychology in real life.
Well, I was doing did a bit of digging in this like in preparation for this episode, and I was like, I've heard this term, and I kind of associate it with just like social media fads and things like this, where people have tried to like convert psychology into something that gets clicks and things. So I was like, well, what does dark psychology actually mean? Um, and it did use like manipulation in there as a primary key word. It was using knowledge of human nature in order to manipulate others to get what you want. And it kind of makes sense. And I think what I thought about a lot was how I see this come up in the sporting world. So, like, for context, Masha, I'm an athlete to a reasonably high level in this country. And this kind of stuff goes on all the time, even if we don't notice it. And I like to think I'm kind of on the spectrum of like people that are super ego possessed and like willing to crush other people to win. I consider myself low on that scale. But even small things like I will overpraise teammates for things that they do because it's like what I want them to continue doing in that game or in that training session, because I know that making them feel good will make that behavior more likely to happen. But does anyone lose in that situation because they're also feeling good because they're being praised, even though like a a degree of my intention is for my own benefit? This is where it gets kind of complicated and the lines get blurred. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but I think then if you start analyzing little actions in terms of intentions, potentially every single thing that we do comes from internal motivation to have something for ourselves and to benefit in one way or another. So it just comes back to the point, do we actually do something for the benefit of others, or is every single action that we have is only relating back to ourselves and our own benefit?
Mm.
And I think again, it comes down to the intentions and the example you've mentioned. You actually have a really great intention to help everybody and yourself. So
Yeah.
then it's the matter of how do you want to judge yourself and others, and do we want to actually say this is what you've done with this intent and you've used this technique and therefore you're using dark psychology, so that's bad. I don't think that's a necessarily objective position to look at the world, because then we're kind of, I think, um, implying something that might not be the case necessarily.
Mm.
That's
Yeah.
a really good point, to be fair.
Well, I think I was thinking about sort of the way we perceive the world, right? It's very goal oriented or like value oriented. So we don't actually see the things around us because there's so much like complex information, or just like the volume of information, it would just overload us cognitively. And so we kind of distill the world down into obstacles towards a goal that we have in that situation, or things that like can move us towards that goal. And that can be physical objects, but it can also be people, and all the kind of factors of a circumstance. And I wonder if we do unconsciously do certain things that would be put under the bracket of dark psychology in order to just achieve a goal in a situation. And I think sport makes it a very easy example to sort of pin to in day-to-day life. But I think this happens in business, which, you know, you guys, Jacob, you might have a good idea of as a business student, or Masha, you in the fashion world. I wonder if there's a lot of that in terms of people rising up the ranks in different organizations and things. It makes me think of a lot of, are you accustomed to like Robert Greene's work? He wrote the book 48 Laws of Power.
I've heard of him, yes.
Yeah, he kind of, it's his stuff that he kind of outlined. He was saying that he was outlining what was already there. Basically, he wasn't bringing anything new. And I think that's what you mentioned of like these theories or the research kind of just brings light on what human beings have been doing probably forever, because we're so status oriented. I mean, what do you think, Jake? Do you see this? Do you see this in business? Do you see this in your life? Do you see sort of the Robert Greenification of people's behavior?
Yes, definitely. I think I've got a silly example, but when you're talking about manipulation, I was thinking about the other day when I was at home and my sister came into the kitchen and she was like, she came in very moody, and she was like, she had she was very indecisive about like getting ready and getting ready for the day and stuff, and taking a lots of long time to like just make simple choices like what breakfast she's going to have. So what I do is I basically say, okay, you're going to have this, and I start making it for her. And I'm like, okay, how many shredded wheat do you want? Do you want two? Do you want three? And essentially, I'm just straight up manipulate her to just like eat quickly. And that is a silly example, but it's like I was thinking about what Masha said about, are we just doing everything for our like our own selfish like does a part of it come from selfish desire? And I'd be like, that is selfish for me to rush my sister to get ready and to eat. But it's also mutually beneficial for her because she gets to leave the door and get to school or whatever on time. And so I think some of it is it's does come from this like outcome thing, but I think we can think about it in terms of mutually beneficial outcomes. Why we're doing things, and I think that applies a lot in business as well, right? Because you with business relationships, you want something that's good for both people. So, but if there was some sort of trick or deceit involved, then then wouldn't be mutually beneficial. And I guess the last example that I was thinking about that I bring up, I'm bringing up from when we were sort of talking about vulnerability is I used to know this girl at uni, and I I was around her for like a year, but I didn't really know her. And I was thinking about why is this? And it was because she was never like really that vulnerable. And and it's just not necessarily dark psychology, but it's just an observation. That she would essentially she would do what Robert Greene calls a smoke screen, where she would essentially talk and talk and talk. She'd talk so much, and it's almost like she filled the air with so much yap.
Mm.
That the air's filled with so much yap that there's never any sort of attention on her. And she would control the narrative, and she's like a very, very sociable person. But I think when you're constantly asking questions, then you're more in control. When you're constantly talking, you're more in control. And I think sometimes we don't think about the people that constantly talk as concealing as much as the people that barely speak. So yeah, that's just some thoughts about what I tend to see.
I really like that, the examples. I love how you really picked apart some of the things and situations that all of us find ourselves in, and then gave a really concrete example of how dark psychology per se could be used. The thoughts that I had in response to this is one can call this manipulation, but then sometimes you could look at it from self-protection level. So even you in the situation with your sister, what you were really doing is protecting your own time and protecting your kind of emotions and peace potentially, because I would assume you got a little bit irritated at your sister, because I have a sister myself, so I completely understand. And in terms of the girl you're talking about, if she did that in order to specifically with the intention of achieving a certain goal or getting something out of you, then I feel like that's one case. But I would assume that she most likely wasn't really aware of it. And it was probably her subconscious mechanisms trying to protect her because she was, say, scared of intimacy, or she was scared of rejection. And then that was something that she unconsciously was doing in order to protect her identity and her peace without even realizing it. And then after, when you start analyzing her actions from this perspective now, then you could potentially say, this is what she was doing. Maybe she was, but I don't think she was necessarily aware of it, which then again flips the question of, was it actually manipulation, or was it just our natural human mechanisms in place that we then post the situation happening labeled as such?
Yeah, I think maybe a good way to put this all together and kind of make that clear distinction between just being a human and having human nature and natural human psychological like inclinations and actually going out to manipulate people is this idea of mutual benefit and it not being like a zero sum situation. And yes, you can gain from it, but if the general circumstance also gains in some way, like in the sporting example, the team works well, or in the business example, profits go up for that quarter because of a change that you made, or your sister's happier because she's doesn't have to dither on the decision of breakfast, but the morning goes more smoothly, or maybe for that person who's a bit more guarded, it just makes that social situation just smoother for everybody. Because I think if we all went around in the world as our most vulnerable self to everyone, we wouldn't really be able to function in society like we do. We just have to kind of stop and have conversations and maybe start crying every day with everyone and trauma dumping and things like this. Like, you have to save those things for people that you feel safe enough to do that with. And so people do put guards up, but maybe to protect themselves, like you said very rightly, but also just to protect the superficiality of that situation, because we like to shit on superficiality and say, there's all these things about hating small talk and all that, but we do need it in some way. When I go and pay for petrol at a fuel station or go to a supermarket or whatever, just do these things that everyone needs to do. Everyone does have to have a little transactional relationships. And I think it's okay to put up some guards sometimes, as long as you do have situations where you can put them down. So I think it's very context dependent. And I think it's actually rare you get people that will consciously do things to bring other people down and have themselves rise up. I think then we're talking about the narcissists and the psychopaths, who we like to think there are more of them than there actually are. But the average person is just the average person trying to get through a day. And I think, yeah, we're not as evil as we'd like to think, or other people aren't as evil as we'd like to think.
I agree. Like when you're thinking about the connotations of dark psychology, how much do I really see? Not too much. Not too much. Not many people are that dark. I don't think, around me anyway. I do think this mutually beneficial thing is the answer. And especially when I'm thinking about sales and marketing context, which is a lot of sort of my background, where I think if someone was to just put like kind of scam you in some sort of offer that doesn't really make sense with a product that's extremely overpriced or something, then that's not a mutually beneficial transaction, and therefore you're being manipulated for an unfair outcome. But I mean, I used to see a lot of this in the sales world when I'd kind of question it, where like some of my colleagues would be like, "Oh yeah, I've already sold to like 9 people, and it's like 10 a.m." It's like, and it's like the people are like, they're manipulated to think, "Oh yeah, there's the people are buying it, so it must be good," and things like that. So I'd question things, and yeah, I think a good thing to think about is this world. I'd be interested in your thoughts here, Masha. And like, do you see relationships as how much do you see relationships as sort of transactional versus maybe this sort of platonic thing that we can't really categorize, and relationships are they're pure and you can't really put like a thing on it. Do you know what I mean with sort of like these the two ways of thinking maybe of relationships of transactional versus platonic?
I think one doesn't necessarily contradict the other. I feel like all human relationships potentially could be considered as transactional because even if you're giving energy to a person and say love and affection, you would want to feel at least some of it in return, just in order for you to feel good about yourself and kind of validated. And if you're giving everything and then you're not receiving anything back, then I just feel like you're not going to feel this connection that you want to feel, and then potentially go into a toxic relationship cycle and needing that person's approval, validation, etc., in order to feel good about yourself, or you just wouldn't feel any connection at all, and the relationship will fall apart. So I think there's two people in a relationship innately, and what I actually heard recently that really, really resonated with me is that whenever people have problems in relationships and then they come and they're like, huh, she said this and he said this, like, what do we do? The question that you can actually ask is literally, okay, you have problems in your relationship. How exactly do you relate to one another? And I feel like that then flips the question fully because then how do you relate to your partner? How does your partner relate to you? Where's the connection? What actions do you do in order to have and build something beautiful? And I think it kind of like flips it upside down and makes you really think about things that matter and that contributes to the relationship itself.
Mm, I think you're right. I think it's another one of those situations where the lines get blurred and it's kind of a mishmash of both depending on the situation. I think when we look at relationships on a surface level, acquaintances and people that we have to work with and just manage with, yes, that's very highly transactional. They will do their job reliant on the fact that you do your job in that situation, and so everyone gets what they want. But when it comes to more intimate kind of relationships, there is a transaction in that you don't want to be the one that's just giving and giving and giving and receiving nothing back. But maybe when a relationship becomes more vulnerable and more intimate and closer, is you'll be willing to delay your gratification on that side of the transaction if they're going through a tougher time. It's like I'd be more likely to call up a teammate, let's say, if they haven't like done their job in a particular like sporting situation quicker than I would be with my partner if she was going through a rough time. You kind of give those people more of a leeway because you love them as close to unconditionally as you can if it gets to that point. And then because you know that eventually that transaction will swing back and you'll be fed and energized in the way that you need to be, but you kind of have a little bit more patience. Does that resonate with either of you?
Definitely. But I think, again, we're coming back to the fact that you're waiting for it to return back to you. And I think ultimately you're choosing a person, hopefully, based on how they make you feel.
Mm.
And that is also, in one might say, a transactional example because you're waiting to feel butterflies in your stomach. You're waiting to feel like you care about someone because caring about someone is also a really nice feeling.
Yeah, it's complicated, isn't it? It's complicated, and we never really know when we've got it right. Do you have any more thoughts on that, Jake, before I pivot slightly to something?
I was thinking about when does a relationship not come transactional, and I think when you take two people, I think there exists like a space between them, and that space normally is characterized by something that connects them, like a mutual thing that can connect people. And I think it's something external, right? And so maybe you often you talk to someone about university, or maybe you talk to someone about your passion in literature. And that's the thing that kind of maybe there's like a common denominator that allows sort of values to connect and things like that. But then when people say, for example, people leave uni and they go to their different directions, or those two friends that are into literature no longer uh, talking about that, then I think then that common space between the people, that kind of, if that was to like sort of go away, and then I guess you can ask, like, will those people still have that same strong relationship? I don't think so. But then it's sort of just like an individual and another individual, two sort of pure selves. And I think if those two people were then to keep being sort of um, friends, then maybe then that would be the transactional element away from it. Because I guess the transactional thing might come from, say I've got a friend at uni and we're both like studying the same course, we're both like helping each other because I feel like I'm helping him with his uni work, and in return he keeps me, like, he tells me what classes to go to or something, I don't know. Then that's where that sort of transactional thing comes in. But if we were then to he was then to go back to Cyprus and I'm then to stay in the UK and we still carry on texting, then maybe that transactional thing's sort of gone away and it's more about actually caring about each other. But
Well,
that's just, yeah.
what I saw in that you said there, Jacob, and I wonder if you agree, Masha, is that was a shift to me from you liking somebody for what they do to then liking them for who they are. And that's that then we get into some vague woo-woo spiritual rabbit holes. But I think there's some truth to that. It's like you're not just with that person because you do the same thing together. You like them in whatever ineffable way we can try and pin that down. You know, their self that's underneath the things they do, which is, you know, who they exist as when they're not really doing anything, when they're a feeling, thinking creature, beyond the sort of, you know, material labels we can put on things. But one thing I did want to pivot to before we move on from the dark psychology stuff, because there is more that we want to pack into this conversation, is one thing that I thought about that comes up a lot in that answer to your first question, Jacob, on what's most frequent, is the sort of two-facedness of everybody and how we are so hesitant to tell people what we really think for whatever reason. I don't necessarily think I'm always talking about, you know, when we lie to other people, but I just mean even when we hold back on telling somebody a truth about what we think about what they've done or something to protect them, or we have a self that we can be around certain people and a self that we feel more naturally like that we are around people we're more comfortable with. And this was dual life we lead between the person we reveal to other people and the person we really are. I think that goes on all the time. I even think, you know, as close as I am with Jacob and we've known each other for however many years and done this podcast for however many years, there's still a slither of me that he never sees. And why is that? Because I do trust him. And I think, yeah, do you guys have any thoughts in that idea about the layers of the self we don't show, and why do we do this?
Well, I think we're social animals and we still play by social roles. I think there's two facets of it. The first one is just self-protection. Again, you don't want to share everything about yourself because ultimately all of us are absolutely terrified of being rejected and being looked at weirdly or being judged. So I think the first layer of why we have multiple personas per se for different people is because that then allows us to have some sort of control over how we protect ourselves and our image and our reputation and the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves. And the second facet of it, I guess, is just social norms and social dynamics because we come into the world and then we're taught certain rules that we have to follow, and then they just become habits, which we do in order to achieve a certain result, aka to be liked, to get a promotion, to achieve a goal that you have. And I think we play by those rules because everyone does, and that's kind of the only way in our heads how we can achieve that. So it kind of becomes this unconscious social dynamic that we just follow.
Well, why do you think people are two-faced, Masha?
Sorry?
Why do you think people are two-faced?
I don't think it's necessarily being two-faced. I think it's showing certain information. I feel like being two-faced is if you're lying about something, and then in reality, that's the complete opposite. I think I look at the two-facedness per se that we're talking about currently is just revealing certain information and not the other. So it's kind of selective or filtering rather of who we are, because it's impossible for me to meet a stranger on the street and showcase all billion parts of my thoughts, my personality, my history, and everything that makes me me. I don't think our human brains would be able to cope with that, both my brain and the person who I'm trying to tell everything about myself for. So I think it's just kind of biases that exist in our brain to protect our peace, and also, again, um, revealing information that's relevant in the specific time and place in order to get the specific result that you're trying to achieve from the conversation you're having.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess you're right. I do think the kind of the lying two-facedness does happen though, but maybe just less frequently. Um, where people will tell people what they want to hear. I think that happens a lot, especially in like very hierarchical situations like sport, like business, any sort of competing organization. Um, you want you want somebody to feel like they're above you, but really they're not, and so you tell them what they want to hear, and it all gets a bit sort of it does all get a bit dark. I think there is an element to that, but yeah, I think an element of it is like you say, self preservation and not sharing too much. Because how interesting would the world be if everyone went around telling their whole truth all the time? I think you're right that maybe we just wouldn't be like mentally capable of taking that in. What would that world look like? Because the social game does determine so much, and it's not something we're taught in school, is it? Unless you study sort of psychology or philosophy or human nature in any way, you're not told how important it is, your reputation in that hierarchy, or and it starts from very early. It starts from what teachers think of you and what your classmates think of you, and how that relates to your sort of self-esteem and your number of friends in school, and how well you perform academically, and then the jobs you go into and the social circles you go into. It's a lot. And but it's also something that's quite ineffable and like not measurable. It's very hard to pin down. Like, what are the rules of the social game? We know we're all playing it, but if you ask somebody, well, what are the rules? Can you write them down? You wouldn't be able to. It's interesting.
I mean, you do get those people that occasionally like blur everything out to you and they tell you their whole life story. I think a lot of the rules are actually like being indirect in like social environments. There's an art to being indirect
Yeah.
to insinuate and to move things forward. I think if I was to summarize most common dark psychology, I think it comes under either like trust and lying, or like concealment and or playing with emotions. There's this law in Three Laws of Power that's like stir up waters to catch fish, and that's kind of this thing that we're talking about like saying things slightly so that you can figure things out from people's emotions. A bit, or it's like play to the hearts rather than the minds of people, where like there's something very powerful that you can do when you kind of manipulate someone to act emotionally. And so I think that would be the sort of common things that the big common things that I see. Yeah.
Definitely. I think understanding psychology is not manipulation, but it's using it without ethics. Then becomes dark psychology. And I think what's really interesting is knowing about a concept, so being aware of it. It gives you choice, but manipulation itself as the concept removes this choice. And I think that's the distinction between intent, I guess, and it kind of ties the whole conversation as we're coming back to, is the concept that you are aware about is used ethically or not?
Yeah, that was really nice. A good sort of summary. So if you don't mind, I'm going to pivot to um, what I think a lot of your content is based on from the research that I did for this conversation about personality and understanding people and people understanding themselves. And I know you wanted to discuss a little bit about your thought process behind your content and sort of your brand and the stuff you put out there. So I guess I'm asking, why are you so interested in understanding people, and why do you think this content that you do does so well? And it kind of in amongst that is, do you think people just have this real strong drive to try and get a handle on themselves and figure out who they are?
I think definitely people want to figure out who they are, or they want to understand something. And I think potentially content like this gives them a little dopamine hit because they get a question, they're still thinking about it, and they get an answer or a space to self-reflect. And ultimately, that's the whole point of why I wanted to build my platform in the first place. I really want to build a space for people to come together and discuss and to think together, to learn something new. I never want my content to be, this is a theory, it's 100% correct, you have to do it this way. I don't think it relates to conversations at all. What I want to create is a space where people feel comfortable coming and learning something they haven't thought about, and then discussing it and saying, oh, I agree with this, or I don't agree with this. Oh, actually, I know an example from my life where that was also the case, or it wasn't. So I think what I really want to, again, create is a space where people can talk and a safe space for thoughts or conversations to emerge without judgment. I feel like people in social media are so quick to judge, to cancel, but that's not really how the world works. And I just feel like all of us should be a bit more curious and kinder to one another. And that then, I think, promotes a really positive space where we can use social media for the better. And regarding my interest in understanding people, I always been this way. I feel like all of us have this innate want to understand people. I've done psychology in high school for IB for high level, and then in university as well. And I think it's just kind of my my want to understand myself and to understand other people. I don't think psychology is about fixing anyone. I think it's just about gaining more understanding and living a more informed, interesting life.
And well, as you've gone on that journey of understanding yourself and others, like, would you see in would you see how this how do you see the shift has been? Like, because I'm thinking, is it like now you know a lot more? Is it kind of like a burden where you can just see through things and you can just like interpret, oh yeah, they're doing that. It's that pattern, and it comes more. It's more. You got more clarity, and when you, or maybe are you like, you understand patterns in yourself, and now you're like very well regulating your mental health and your own sort of. You catch yourself when you're doing something that's maybe um a little bit not authentic, and you're able to correct that. Like, yeah, how do you see that sort of progression as you have now learnt lots more about psychology?
I think first, when you just get into the world of psychology, a really interesting thing happens is that you start seeing patterns that you can't unsee. But then afterwards, I think you get used to it and then you start learning more and more. And then that's where the effects of it per se come in. And I feel like that's where your relationships, both to yourself and to others around you, become better, a bit more kind, a bit more honest, just because I think you have this sympathy for yourself and for other people, because all of us are just trying to do the best we can at any given point in time. And I truly believe this. And I think regarding my research, and the more I know, the more I understand that I don't know anything. And so I think then that becomes my thoughts then become, okay, so I might have an opinion A, B, and C. However, because I know that most likely I don't understand a billion other things about this topic, I am way more curious, I think, about knowledge. And I think the more I learn, the more I want to learn even more, because I'm very aware of the knowledge gap that I possess in pretty much anything, and all of us are. But I think that makes life fascinating rather than doomed, because
Yeah.
there's just so much to learn and so much to talk about and so many perspectives to understand. And I just think it's really exciting and fascinating to be able to connect to people in
When
that
you
way.
say that when the more you learn, the more that you realize you don't know. Do you have an example of that? Because I've we're maybe on a somewhat similar journey in terms of our curiosity, and I understand that. I get that I get that's right, but I don't know. I mean, obviously the big questions about my death and things like that. I know I don't know, but I don't know if I've had like if I can think of many examples where I'm reading and then I realize, oh no, there's this body of knowledge doesn't actually exist. But yeah, do you have any examples?
I think a really great example that potentially everyone who went to university could relate to is writing a paper. So, say you have a thesis and you're like, right, so this is going to be the conclusion of my essay, and I need all of the people who wrote about this to agree with me because I want to get an A. And then you go in the rabbit hole of research, and then you figure out that actually there were 50 people who said that that theory was wrong. And then you go in a rabbit hole of doing a research about why it was wrong. And because in your head you already changed your conclusion, you're like, okay, so they were wrong, these were right. And then you find a third and a fourth and a fifth perspective. And I think that just kind of gives us an understanding of we know only a puzzle. So if you have, I think of life or knowledge or any subject as a puzzle full of a lot of different pieces. And so I know that I know one little bit of it, but then I'm also aware that I probably don't know the rest. And I think um, social media oversimplifies concepts a lot. And I think a lot of people are against that, or they always criticize the oversimplification of ideas in social media. I don't really see it this way. To me, it only becomes bad when people mistakenly start to think that seeing the puzzle is equivalent to seeing the full picture. So I think as long as we understand that there is a lot that we ourselves don't know, then you get to remove this level of short-sightedness, I guess, and start seeing the world a little bit broader.
Yeah,
If that answers your
I
question.
think you've absolutely hit the nail on the head, and I can build on it a little bit more, I think, because I see it as a shift from like a state of autopilot to realizing that you're driving this plane through the sky and you don't even know like where you are, what planet you're on, what the weather's like, and it's like you go from this automatic mode to starting to see the details of everything going on. Like, I'll try and put it in an example. When we're a kid, well, when I was a kid, right, you're told that you see the world, and you're told that you see the world through your eyes. And that is like the model that your brain uses to sort of make the world make sense of how you see. But then when I started learning about psychology and biology, I guess, as well, and learning about how the eye works, that it sees things through light and that the image is actually upside down, but your brain flips it around. And then also things about, color perception on wavelengths of light and all this kind of stuff. And then deciding, well, what do you actually perceive from what you see? What objects do you notice? What things like actually hit your consciousness? Because we're always taking in this light from all the visual like landscapes we go through, but what do we actually notice? How many people have you guys walked past yesterday and you barely remembered their face, but you saw them? So what makes things stick out? What things do you value? What things are salient in the environment so that you notice them? And that, Jacob, I think is what me and Masha are both on about here. Is there's this quote, I don't know if you heard it, Masha, that says the map is not the territory. And we go around with this map of everything, a map of who you are, what you do, what's important, what the world is, how you see, how you hear, what this object means, what you can do with this object, like little models, little puzzles, I think is what you used for it. But when you learn more, you realize that your map is not the territory. And there is so much more you can learn about the nature of everything. And that's almost like a Pandora's box moment where your mind is blown and you go, I actually know nothing. And I'm just kind of carrying out programs wired into my biology. But the cognitive understanding of it is really fascinating, I think. And that's what drives me to learn about this stuff anyway. And that's where, I think it's called the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is this idea that people that learn more think they know less. And I think I saw an explanation of this that imagine knowledge like a circle. And the more you know, obviously, the more expanded your circle becomes. But the more expanded your circle becomes, the like longer the circumference of that circle, the edge of what you don't know gets bigger and bigger also. And so do you get what we both mean, Jacob? Are you more clear on this?
I'm more clear, but just for the people listening and myself, to fully understand, what do you mean by the map is not a territory? And also, when you said we see something flipped around, when you mentioned that, I don't understand what that means.
Okay. So the flipping thing is like simple, just like vision biology. That actually the image that the retinal cells in your eye, like the light that they detect, that image starts in your mind actually flipped upside down, and your brain flips it back to the sort of visual field that you actually see. It's kind of crazy. Yeah. I think it should do with the refraction of the light in the eye. I don't know. I might be chatting shit. I'm not a biologist. But what was your other bit? The map is not the territory. Yeah, that's I think it's Korzybski's quote, a philosopher. What that basically means, Jacob, is what you think the world is and what the world actually is are two very different things. In the same way that if you were a pirate trying to map out a desert island, you could draw a map on a bit of parchment, but it's like saying that the map on the bit of parchment is actually the island. It's not, but you have to use the map to navigate the island. The same way that, you know, I could tell you that the sky is blue or whatever, and that's a map, that's a fact, that's a model that you use to go, oh yeah, the sky's blue. But do you understand why it's blue, or how that's come about, or what shade of blue is it, and how has it always come to be that way? What's the physics going on there? What's the chemistry that's making me see it in this way? That would be the territory, the thing as it is. But you need you would understand in terms of, you need the left hemisphere model that's broken down and taken out of its context. So yeah, does that make sense?
Okay, I think with you, yeah, and that's like a sort of like uh, a better way that we should think about it. And that's like a proven thing. It's not just like it's not like our mind is not just like the when you said like there's difference between what you see, the fraction that you take, and what's actually there. There's not actually there's not a possibility
No.
that it can just be sort of one. No.
Well, I think I've said it in episodes before. I've used it, your cookie cutter view of the world. It's like you've got the dough, which is everything there is, and you take your like brain-shaped cookie cutter and you cut a small bit out, and that's the bit that you deal with, because you would just get cognitively like overloaded. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. And I think in order to understand this a little bit better, it's important to understand that every single person sees the world differently. And the way there's three of us on this call, and three of us probably have a completely different memory and understanding of what's happening right now in this call. And I think an easy metaphor to explain how we process information and then come about to our understanding of the world is thinking about our brain as like a bouncer, like a nightclub bouncer. So then who's given like a list of people to come in. So they're like, okay, so everyone who is over 18 can come in, everyone who's appropriately dressed, everyone who's not absolutely drunk. So you have the list of what your brain allows in, because we receive so much information that our brain just cannot comprehend at any given point of time. So we have to then start filtering it out. And those filters are based on our prior experiences, based on our knowledge, based on our values. And so that then forms whatever we let in our brain. And so then say you have all of this visual stimuli, sound stimuli, so everything that you see, and then it comes into your brain, and then it gets filtered through the list, the pre-existing list that you have. And then only that information then can come in. And that's why it's really different. If, for example, both of us look at the same picture, I might remember something else from you because we have different filtering, because you picked up on information that my brain probably has on block that doesn't even let in. And that's where the red car theory, for example, comes about as well, to demonstrate this really, really well, which is, for example, say that you want to buy a red car, and then suddenly you go outside and you see a billion of red cars, and you're like, what? How did it happen that overnight there is every second car is red? And it's not because there are more red cars, it's because your brain started noticing other things. So potentially what you've done is, because you're looking to buy a red car, you've added another item to your list of what can come into your brain, and that's why you start noticing it. Similarly, when someone's trying to plan a baby, suddenly babies are everywhere. And I think that's kind of how it works. And I think what this understanding really gives us is freedom. And I'm such a fan of it. This makes us such free creatures, because if you understand that everything that you understand is not actually real, but it's only through your lens, then the power comes from the fact that we can actually adjust our lens to whatever it is that we want. We can pick up information in whichever way or shape we want. We can reprogram, or rather redefine, our values, and we can really change this internal representation of everything that we have, and then change our behaviors, therefore, and our life and everything. So I think it kind of gives us freedom, that nothing is set in stone, nothing is stuck, but everyone sees it differently. But you can really mold your life and to be whatever it is that you want to be, which is really, really exciting.
That was, yeah, extremely well explained. And I think it relates to some of your content where I see a lot where you have like a picture of like sort of 8 different men, and how we'll orient ourselves towards one of them in some sort of context of why we're maybe more threatened by them, or why they're more attractive. And I guess to and all 3 of us will have a different one. And I guess I know you kind of touched on it then, but like, why do we why, and especially when you have like those when you make that content with a picture and we pick a particular one, why do we pick that one? And I guess to use your bouncer analogy, why would I let someone, based on the picture, why would sort of my nightclub allow people with trainers versus your nightclub who wouldn't allow people with trainers? Like, I know it's probably based on our environment and our biology, why we sort of maybe see, why we take notice of certain things and in those sort of pictures. But yeah, could you explain that a bit more?
Yeah, I think all of it comes down to your experiences and your values and your emotions, your state. So all of those factors then would influence what information specifically your brain picks up and then how it's being processed. I think regarding the tests, psychological tests, that's a little bit different. Obviously, you have a preference when you're picking a face. I think a lot of the psychological tests, it's important to know that they have been criticized. And again, as we were talking about prior in psychology, it's never set in stone. It's never, okay, so you've seen face A, therefore you must be this, because then it fundamentally disagrees with two concepts. The first concept that we've discussed about that you can change at any specific time, which is really cool. And the second is that psychology has all the answers that are absolute or that are concrete, which is not the case. So I think what I've done with those tests specifically is I read a lot of a lot online, and I find certain things interesting. And when I do, I like to share them. I don't think me sharing the psychological test says, look, the face that you will choose equals who you are. It's more to make people stop and self-reflect, I think. Some people might agree with whatever the test is saying. Some people might not. Again, even the Zondi test that was really popular, it's very highly criticized. But from my perspective, I don't want to have an absolute perspective. What I want to create is a space for people to pause a little bit and self-reflect, agree or disagree, but again, to start a conversation. So I think that is why I was doing those tests. But coming back to your question regarding the balancer, I think it's just perception, information, experiences, emotion, that then act as filters to what you allow inside your brain.
Yeah, I think the bodyguard in the nightclub analogy is really good to kind of get across that, like, what he has on his list of kinds of people he'll let in, that's the map, and all the possible types of people, shapes, and sizes that could come into that nightclub is the territory, and we do filter. And I think the point you made on that perceptual map defining a lot about how we feel about our lives is hugely important. Like, I think that psychological model should be given to kids from as young as possible when they can start understanding it. That what you see is defined by how you feel and the things, the beliefs that you have. You said values, which is very right. I think a lot of it's to do with goals as well in a situation. And that doesn't mean just like life goals or whatever, but just like when you go into a room, what is your intention? What's your aim out of this situation? That then defines a lot of what you see. And a lot of that is malleable through conscious work and through the kind of self-reflection that you pointed to your content being about. And I agree with you. Like, they're not scientific at all. If they're viewed through that lens, then people will criticize them. However, if they're viewed as, okay, you picked this thing and you were told this thing, whether you agree with it or not, why do you think you were drawn to this picture or this image? What is it in you that made you choose X over Y? Because then you start to do that kind of like that introspective process, which I think is the seed or the catalyst of a lot of very important self growth. And then that's why when we hear things like a gratitude practice improves people's mood because they see things more positive in their life. I mean, that is actually studied in research as a real thing, because like you said with the red car analogy, in a lot of ways you start to perceive the things you think about most. And if you go around with like this angry, pessimistic, cynical mentality towards the world, you will begin to see that, the world will become an angry, combative, cynical place to live in. And it's one of those things that, like, you'll get heat for saying that, because people that are having a tough time will turn around and go, well, you can't just tell me to think happier. And I know it's not, it's a lot more complicated than that. But the idea that between you and the world, there is a lens or a perceptual filter, and you can control that over time. But it does take mindfulness and it takes self-reflection. And that's why I think psychology and these little psychological activities and tests are important.
Yeah, because that allows you to initially see it, the psychology test. I was just gonna add quickly, like I'm get on thinking on this conversation, like I want the best nightclub. I want the best like lens. I want the best like I want the best territory. So I guess what does that mean that I would need to do to get that?
Mm. That's a good question. Go on.
I love this question because I feel like I've been really thinking about this a lot. I think it's about what it is that you want from your life, because the best would be very subjective to you. And say you want to become the best podcast host in the whole world. And so in order to become this, then what I would do if I were you, I would study the best podcast host in your opinion. What do they do? How do they think? How do they carry themselves? How do they carry the conversation out? And then because the concept of the best becomes touchable, then suddenly you can see it, you can touch it, you can feel it. And then therefore you can implement those techniques to you and then see if they fit or not. And I feel like the concept of modeling whatever you think is the best kind of then answers your question.
Yeah, yeah, imitation of what you want. I like that. And what I'd also add to that, Jacob, is I think there are expansive and limited or like constraining worldviews, um, and you want to have as many expansive kind of bullet points on that map, that perceptual lens as you want, and to sort of put that in examples. We talk about open-mindedness a lot, but that's very important. Or think there's this term I saw recently called pronoia, and it's the opposite of paranoia. And pronoia is like the idea that you believe behind everything that the universe is secretly conspiring for you, and it's kind of like optimism turned up to the max, and a belief in opportunity. When doors open, when challenges come in front of you, you can either see that as a hurdle that you won't be able to surmount, or you can see it as an opportunity for growth. There's a writer called George Mack who writes a lot about agency as a character trait. And he says, can you reframe the ideas of problems in your life and call them puzzles? Because a problem sounds scary, but a puzzle sounds fun. And can you see that work project or that goal you set or that thing you want to accomplish as a puzzle rather than a problem? Like little twists like that you can do to your perceptual lens to make everything seem more doable. I think it does build on what you said, Masha, because people that do the best in whatever industry, they would have some real, like, reliable traits to their perception of their behavior and the world that has allowed them to get to where they are. Because the person who has the belief that what's in front of them is a puzzle that they can break down and eventually get through, compared to the person that sees it as an insurmountable obstacle, well, person A is just going to overtake person B in not a lot of time. And that's why it's so cliche that mindset is so important, but it just is. It lays the groundwork for everything in your life.
But I think it's very difficult. I think
100%.
I think a lot of people hear that, and by the way, I also use the puzzle analogy in my everyday life. I love it. But I think a lot of people say, okay, so how am I supposed to then become this person? I think an understanding of your limiting beliefs is a really good start, because as you said, that there are expansive beliefs and beliefs that limit us, and all behaviors that we do for a reason, even if it's unhelpful behavior. Potentially there's a value contradiction or something else that's going on underneath. So I think the first step in actually getting yourself free out of this is paying attention and recognizing. So what is it that you do? What is your reaction? What do you like in life? What do you want from life? And kind of mapping this out, and then just paying attention and adding a lot of self-love and kindness into it as well. Because I think self-talk is one of the most fundamental things that comes with changing yourself and changing your life for the better, because it actually allows you to see the problem rather than being absolutely blinded by self-hatred and self-criticisms that a lot of us actually are very used to. And I think that's a really good start then for people to identify, is there something that you believe about yourself that holds you back? And what is it that you want to potentially believe about yourself? And then kind of starting there and then adding other things. Because I feel like it's very difficult to completely change your mindset for it to be a puzzle if you have a billion limiting factors that actually protect you. Again, I think every behavior is the result of something. So it's there for a reason. Maybe in the past you had a situation you didn't really know how to cope better, but now it just stuck with you. And now that's your brain's first instinct to do if situation X arises. So in order to get rid of this, you have to figure out what it is, pay attention to it. And then a million times, how many times do you have to forget in order to remember, go through this process, and then you start to finally see the positive light. But I think it's important to say that it's not an easy thing and everyone finds it very, very difficult, and it's okay that it's very, very difficult, but that should not discourage you because there is kind of a light at the end of the tunnel. I just
Yeah.
think a lot of people get really like negative and disappointed, I guess, when it doesn't work out or when they can't really do what the person they're watching on the internet does straight away.
100%. I massively agree with you. Um, and I think it's one of those where the reason it's so well, because it's not easy, because it's perhaps the most difficult thing to do to change yourself, it's the most valuable at the end. Because what I was thinking then as you were talking was like everything we do materially in the world, you know, our jobs, our hobbies, or whatever. Firstly, a lot of that to me feels very fleeting. Like even if you achieve like the biggest material goal you had in your career, yes, it may get you to a certain like point of status or whatever, or an admiration from others, but the actual joy and thrill of achieving that thing is so fleeting. And I think that's just part of like human nature. But the thing that the positive thing that doesn't like flit away and that stays a lot more like, you know, it can maintain itself through the storms of life and across time is your relationship to yourself, because you are you always in every single situation. And you know, your relationship to your, like you say, your mental narrative is there all the time. It's not like a roommate that you can kick out or you can move away. You're stuck with your mind from the day you're born or the day you become conscious to the day you die. And so it's I think it's a good way of thinking about it to be the most important like project of your whole life. And it's not going to be a like overnight thing, like you say, but it's a notice a small change. Can you adjust something? How does that feel? Does it feel better? If so, can you repeat that again tomorrow? And it's I think that's what the path of human life should be, especially nowadays, now that our like survival instincts are largely taken care of by, you know, the privileged Western societies we live in. Um, Now it's about like connecting to yourself. And I think we get distracted with all the external stuff. But that internal work, which you're so right is super difficult, is the most meaningful work one can do. And all the great like elders I have in my life, family members, people that I know that are older than me that seem to kind of have life figured out. That's what they always say, that it's an internal shift that's brought them the most like actual peace in life.
Investing in your brain is the ultimate investment.
Mm, yeah.
I don't think it's stuck though, because you said, I just wanted to really quickly point, because you said you're stuck with your mind. I think it's important to reiterate that you're always can change anything that you want and that your mind is actually super valuable. And then one more thing that I wanted to add, I agree with everything that you said, by the way, genuinely. And I had a lot of conversations with people from my life who I look up to, who have it all figured out, which no one actually ever does. But seems to be the common theme. I think a lot of it is also about identity and labels that we attach with ourselves. And as you were saying, that if you say have $1 billion, you're not going to be happy unless you have this relationship with yourself. But I also, whenever I have a goal, I try to think about identity shifts that I can have in order to achieve that goal. So for example, if I want to say make $1 million, I wouldn't say, okay, so my goal is to make $1 million. My goal in that case would be to become a person who's capable of earning $1 million. And I think then takes off the pressure from the goal itself, from the objective goal, and it really allows you to look inward. And then it's not about this anxiety. Oh my God, I have like 999,000 more to earn in order to become this person. But it's more about, okay, so what daily actions can I take? If I want to become someone who's capable of earning $1 million, am I self-confident? And if yes, then how do I become more self-confident? How do I think? How do I talk to myself? What are my friends like? What are my habits like? Do I drink water? And then it kind of becomes a list of more manageable things for our mind that will help us, rather than put us in the state of anxiety and self-doom.
This is a question for both of you, but Masha, you pointed out that no one has it figured out. Why do you think that no one has it figured out?
Well, I think it's coming back to the fact that no one ever knows everything at the same time. And if you only know a little puzzle of the whole picture, then how can you potentially say that you understand life or you're doing life the correct way? Also, I think figured out implies that there is a right way of being, of living, and of thinking, which I don't think there is. I think that's the beauty of life, that everyone lives how they want to and what makes them happy. And I think life is very up and down. It's not a destination journey. I think it's about having a good moment and feeling really great and achieving things, but then something might happen that you don't really anticipate, and that might potentially bring you to a different situation or energy or mental state. So I think having it figured out is such an individual concept, and not all, like, I don't think there's a single person on this planet who feels amazing 100% of the time and like they just know what they're doing. I think life is just way too unpredictable for it, and it would be unfair to say that there is a way to figure life out, because then it simplifies it a lot, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's two sides to it. One is like when I think a lot of people say that, they see having it figured out as like ticking a series of external world boxes so that that person no longer feels the daily stresses that I do. So that's like they are financially stable, they have a good family life, and they're not being like battered down every single day by some kind of stressor. They don't have a job they hate, or they have some passions going on. Like we just see people that seem like they're living a stable, happy life. But that, I think I 100% agree with you. That's not having it figured out. That's just being lucky and blessed and working hard enough to get those material like milestones ticked off. Having it figured out really is a constant internal process of like change and evolution and transformation. I feel that's what human life is, at least from my sort of more spiritual, psychological, philosophical worldview. That's what we're here to do. Is when you come to the end of your life, is your mind or your soul or whatever term you want to use, how developed has that become? And I think of a quote. I want to say it's from Joseph Campbell's work on sort of mythology, or it could be from somewhere different. I don't know where I'm attributing this to, but this quote that the person who thinks the journey is done is truly lost. This idea that if you ever feel like you're completed, you've completely missed the point. What in its entirety, and it's constant internal evolution and that process of self-reflection and transformation. That's what being a human is. That's what we can do with the consciousness we've been blessed with. So yeah, what do you think from that, Jake?
I mean, I guess why I asked the question was I was thinking about people that sort of at the top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and the people that, like the old people that you see, are just living a simple life. They don't have to do anything anymore. They don't necessarily have any wants. And to me, that I'd be sort of figuring it out, because I did think that there was maybe maybe not totally figured out, but there is people that seem like they got it. They don't need anything more. I think for me, it would have come from a point of not wanting or needing anything else.
Lack
I
of
mean,
desire, a kind of Buddhist enlightenment type vibe. I do see that. Like, there's a modern philosopher called Nassim Taleb who has this quote that pops up back into my mind occasionally, and he said something like, "One is not truly philosophically civilized unless they can spend a day, doing nothing, learning nothing, and not feel any guilt or shame about it. Just that true being, just being." And I think in my stage of life now, I don't know if both of you relate to this, being young, quite ambitious, a lot of uncertainty in the road ahead. That ability to just be, I'm not at that point. I can't do that now. And sometimes when I sit in a coffee shop and I'm doing work or whatever, and I see an old lady sat there with her cappuccino doing a crossword, looking out the window, there's a part of me that's really jealous of her. And maybe she's not this idyllic, like she doesn't have this idyllic internal environment like I'm imagining. She probably doesn't. But just that idea, like you say, Jacob, of not needing any more, having no needs is powerful. And maybe we can get that now by just being a bit more minimalist and not sort of having this capitalistic mindset for more and more and more. But maybe there's something to that, this lack of desire idea. What do you think, Masha?
Well, I feel like the key word here is seems. I don't think if someone seems happy or
Yeah.
without needs, they are. I think we never understand the full picture. And even in regarding to, okay, so I'm seeing this person with a great job, a great family, and everything that I want, I'd never take their life because I don't know what's happening like underneath that I don't know. So I wouldn't risk because I don't know just so much about it. I feel like that comes again back to the image that we present of ourselves to the world. And I just think everyone has their own problems and challenges, and all of them are valid. And we should just be a bit more, I guess, aware of that and kinder to other people, even if their life seems perfect. I think as humans, our natural tendency is to judge really quickly, or to say, I don't have this person has this, therefore that person's better than me, and kind of putting labels and compare because that's how our brain makes sense of things. And it's easier for us to then comprehend and understand. But I think it's an unhappy way to live because then you can never win if you look at life in that regard. And I think I'd say that just focusing on, okay, so what about this lady in a cafe who's doing a crossword puzzle? Do I like? What about her life am I kind of jealous of? Because then you can use the emotion of jealousy as something to turn into inspiration. And then you can say, okay, I'm actually feeling like I would also want to be this lady. Why? Probably because I don't give myself enough rest. Is there a way to take that into account and add a little bit of rest into my life? And then suddenly that jealousy or that need for having a crossword puzzle is met. And so you can stop thinking about it and so you can move on with your life more productively. So I'm a big fan of taking emotions that we feel and using them as data and using them as understanding what of my needs and values are not met and how can I use this to then meet them and live a happier and healthier life.
Yeah, that's nice. It makes me think of we had this quite odd bloke on the podcast recently, but he dropped some dimes of wisdom on us. He's an architect from Finland, and he was talking about creativity, but trust me, this does make sense in this context. He talked about the two kind of paths that people can take in creativity, but I think we can expand his two paths to life. And one path was of comparison. That limits your worldview, and you're always looking towards others and what others are doing to try and think about what you should be doing. And then his other path was the path of exploration and trying to create magic and things that have never been seen before and things that make sense to your intuition. And I think you've kind of hit that in what you've said there, that rather than comparing ourselves to what people seem like they're doing and the life that they're living, we can explore, well, what features of their superficial life would I like in mine, and what can I do? Kind of your shift again of going from wanting the goal to being the person that could get the goal effortlessly, and that kind of self focus on things. We can explore our own potential and our own self rather than like feeling the pain and the inferiority of comparing our lives to what others seem like they're doing. Really nice.
Yeah. I think this might be a good place to wrap up unless you got any other questions, Joel.
No, I think it's wonderful. I think should we ask Masha our usual last guest question, like we tend to do, and then
Yeah.
we'll get going. So basically, what we like to do when we get different people on from different walks of life is we like to finish the conversation by giving them an opportunity to say anything they wish to say, whether that is to me and Jacob, whether that is to the people listening. It could be something you've been thinking about a lot at the moment, something you've recently learned that you think is valuable, or something you just think the world needs to hear. And it will be, permanently immortal via, technological audio platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So this is your moment to have the microphone and say what you feel you need to say.
No pressure at all. Love that. I think I just say that life is super exciting and it's full of opportunities if you pay attention enough to see it. And that I wish that people just became kinder. And I feel like that would bring all of us more peace. And I think curiosity goes a long way. And that's a skill that we as a society are slowly at the risk of losing. So if through conversations like this, we can keep curiosity alive even more, or multiply it, the better. I think that should be the goal. At least it's my goal, at least. So I just hope that everyone who feels lost know that there is just so much that they can do and have personal agency to change that. Nothing's ever set in stone, and conversations like this could be potentially an answer for someone to resonate with an idea that could later down the line change their life or their self-talk, which is amazing.
Amazing. If people want to find out more about you or your work, where should they go?
My social media,
Which is?
Masha.Kaptilina, both TikTok and Instagram. Later YouTube as well.
Hey, there we go.
Thank you very
thanks
much.
for listening. Hope you enjoyed this one.